as this block was going downhill really, really quickly. Let me Well, hi and welcome to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. I'm working on another AZURE block and I wanted to give you a little peek at what happens before you usually join us for these. A lot of times I've already sewn most of the block and I'm just joining you as I complete it so you can see a little bit about that process. But frankly, there's a lot of sewing that goes on before you usually join me. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a peek at that as well. Today I'm working on the block number 46, Hearth and Home Quilt. And I will be back just after this and I'll tell you what I've done, what I'm doing now, and show you hopefully what it looks like before we finish today. We'll be right back. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm working on this block, and this particular piece I'm working on has an awful lot of little pieces. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what happens behind the scenes on these blocks and then what you see. And I'm just kind of finishing up the last two strips of this block. So bear with me while I wrap this up, and then I can give you my undivided attention. I don't want to leave these half done. So usually on one of these AZURE blocks, I spend anywhere from an hour to 2 to sometimes 3 hours working on the pre-sewing to the blocks. And by that what I mean is selecting the block, printing out the pattern, cutting out all the little subunit pieces. And then if it's a block that has a lot of the same subunits, then I go ahead and sew most of them together and usually leave one to sew together. And then even with that filming to sew that one block and then constructing the whole thing, usually we're looking at a 30 to 40 minute video for one of these blocks. But I wanted to not leave you with the impression that in 30 minutes you could get the block done. There's a couple of them you might be able to, but most of them, because they have so many little pieces, it's going to take a while. So I'm working on this one today, and let me adjust my chair a little bit. This particular block only has 2 fabrics in it, and I've chosen to do that so that we can move it along really quickly. We're down to making this one and one more. Now let's talk about this block a little bit. This is Hearth and Home. Here is the instruction sheet for that. And I drafted it up, and I was going to have what I'm going to call the star in this as being a white. But as I'm getting down to just needing those few blocks left, I'm really thinking about whether it needs to be a predominantly darker block or a predominantly lighter block. And for this one, with what I have left, it needs to be a predominantly darker block. So I switched up the colors after I color coded it here. And these are the 3 center strips. The whole strip in the middle is going to be dark. And these are going to be these. And then we're going to have this piece and this piece. They're kind of mirror images of each other. They're going to go on next. And we're working through both of these at the same time because it's the same thing on each side. They're just faced differently. So we're working on that. And it's really just a matter of putting each and every piece on there. And I know that sounds kind of crazy. There's no big super secret to all this stuff. It's just one piece at a time. So the next piece we're putting on is a square. And I can look at this and say it's a 1 1/4 inch square, and then we need at least 1/4 inch all the way around. So it's a 1 1/2 inch piece that we need. And I think because it's a square, we're just going to go ahead and cut that, at least that length from this scrap. So it's just a little bit easier to handle. Okay, so then we can put that on here. And on the other one, because we are sewing 2 at a time. That makes it go a little bit faster when you're doing that. So we'll do that one real quick. Okay, I had to take a little bit of a break because this block was going downhill really, really quickly. Let me tell you, it really was stressing me out because every time I sewed a block on, it didn't fit right. And that's the one thing about this foundation paper piecing that does frustrate me, is that it looks like it's going to work and then it doesn't work. And I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. My biggest problem is I'm trying to make this work where it's not going to work. And I've got to get out of that mindset and just not do that anymore. And sometimes that means using the biggest fabric you have for a little tiny piece of the pie. So what I did was I had 2 of these to do. I got 1 of them done. So that's done. And I'm working on the last one, and it only has 2 more pieces. So surely I can get it done. But like I said, sometimes that means you've got to use a big old piece of fabric. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut me a piece here that's way bigger than I need and just put it on here and roll with it. So I'm trying to even look at this and see what does it need. What does it need to do? That's what it needs to do. Okay, so we're going to sew it just like that and hope it's right. Oh my goodness, I just don't. Sometimes I'm not quite sure why it's so difficult. Whether it's me, whether it's the process, whether I'm just not. I think I'm just not in the right headspace to do it. Okay, let's see if that one worked. And look, now that's going to work. So we're going to come back in here and trim it. Okay. And we're going to fold that over. That's good. We're going to pin it in place. Now I just have 1 white piece to do. And it's a square, so we should be okay with that. And I should be able to just put that right on there and go. I think I'm going to do it this way. That doesn't look quite straight. Bear with me just a minute. We're going to sew it just like that. But I think you can see now why sometimes, oops, that other side's not trimmed. That's why it looks so big. I think you can see why sometimes it takes so long to prepare these and why they can be so frustrating. Okay, 1 stitch. I find that sometimes this is the hardest of the whole thing. It's not the assembly, it's not the little tiny pieces. It's just trying to judge how that's going to work. Oh, yeah, that's good. All right, so now all we need to do is do our little basting stitch around the edge. We're going to do that real quickly. And that is a 5.0 stitch length. That's super easy to do. Whoops, oops, my fabric is twisted. Yep. Easy to fix. Okay. Well, we're going to come at this from the other side. Okay, so all I need to do is trim that. I'm going to do that. Okay, that's all trimmed. We can get rid of all of that now. And let's see what our pieces are going to look like when they're put together. So we have our center piece here, and then we have our two pieces that go that way and that way. Now, if I had recorded this the way I normally record, I probably would have had everything put together like this, and then just added this one, or I would have had these three pieces and just added these two. But really the construction for this block is so straightforward. We're just going to hook these together like we've been doing by matching up our corners, and we're going to put it together really the same way. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these really quickly, and I'm going to get these outer pieces hooked together, and I'm just going to show you the finished block. There's nothing new in any of the concepts for this block that we haven't covered on several other shows. So we'll just come back with the finished product. I'm coming back to you to show you that I have 3 strips sewn together for this side and 2 for this side. So I'm just going to sew these last 2 strips together. And of course I'm using the same process that I've used for all the others. And I'm just putting in the pins at my corners and then joining those up. This is very straightforward as far as the assembly. I am using those little clips to hold them in place. And now we have all 5 of the strips put together. And here is our finished product. Now it is in some ways very striking, but in other ways pretty plain. But it is our block number 46, Hearth and Home. If you chose to do it by alternating colors in these blocks instead of having the same color, or if you chose in this block, you could have had these at the end be different colors. I think in choosing those squares to be monochromatic, It gives you the look of a simpler block, but I think that in the overall design for our project, we have enough blocks with lots of little pieces. So it was an opportunity to do something a little simpler, and yet still have that same look. And I don't think we have another block that looks like that. We have all of our blocks here that have been completed. And I think for the most part, you might have had a kind of a behind the scenes look at how frustrating some of these can be. They sometimes make me want to pull my hair out between the blocks and the filming problems. It can get a bit much. So all I'm doing right now is I'm taking out the stitching for one of these seams so you can just see the difference in how it lays after you get that paper out. Okay, that one seam is done. So I think you can tell now when those are all done that that's going to lay really nice and flat. I'm not going to waste any more of your time taking the paper out on this one. It's going to be pretty straightforward as to how it's done. It's going to be just like the others. This is number 46, Hearth and Home Quilt. And we've chosen to do this in a more monochromatic look where all the blue is the same fabric. And we've not chosen to make a lot of the blocks the half blocks. And you certainly could do that. It could be that it was intended to have the different colors within the individual blocks. And that's why it's called Hearth and Home Quilt instead of just Hearth and Home. But as most quilting, it's always quilter's choice as to what fabric you use. And this is what I chose for this one. Again, this is number 46, Hearth and Home, without the paper removed, without the thread clipped off. It is just raw, just now done. So we'll work on the paper and get this ready to assemble into our quilt very soon. Thanks so much for joining me today. I know this has probably been a little frustrating to watch because it certainly has been a little frustrating to sew. And we are done and we're getting into the home stretch for these blocks. Thanks for joining me today. If you liked anything you got out of today, please give me a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and we'll see you next week right here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.